In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King attends the inauguration ceremony of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as Egypt's new president and discusses with him ways to enhance bilateral ties and coordination. The Palestinian and Israeli presidents joined Pope Francis in an unprecedented prayer meeting at the Vatican in a gesture hoped to lead to relaunching the stalled Middle East peace process. And former peace envoy to Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, says the situation in Syria is getting worse and cautions that it poses a grave threat to the future of the Middle East. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King was present at the inauguration ceremony of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as Egypt's new president at Al-Ittihadiyya Palace in Cairo today, among other heads of state and leaders. King Abdullah congratulated al-Sisi for the people's confidence in him and wished him success in leading Egypt to further prosperity and development and meeting the nation's aspirations to a secure and stable future. Following the inauguration ceremony, His Majesty met with al-Sisi and discussed with him ways to enhance bilateral ties and coordination. King Abdullah said Jordan stands by Egypt and by the choices of its people and expressed support to the country's new leadership as it works to reinstate security and continue the building process. His Majesty attended a luncheon banquet hosted by al-Sisi in honor of leaders attending the inauguration. Al-Sisi won Egypt's presidential election on Tuesday by a landslide majority. This report has the details.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أقسم بالله العظيم.
In the name of God, I swear that I will be loyal to the Republican system and will respect the Constitution, take care of the nation and maintain the nation's independence, its unity and security.
ووحدة وسلامة أراضي.
Egypt's former military chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is sworn in as a president, vowing to lead the country through important changes. He had won 97% of the vote in last month's presidential election for a 4-year term. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has promised to fix the mistakes of the past. He said his election was a democratic, peaceful handover of power that represented a historic moment and turning point for the Egyptian nation.
إنني أعتزم أن تشهد مرحلة البناء المقبلة.
I intend to make sure the upcoming rebuilding phase will be full of pledges, domestically and internationally, to make up for what we have missed and fix the mistakes of the past. We will establish a strong republic that will be just, safe and stable, prosperous and blessed. A republic that believes in knowledge and work, and a state that realizes that resources have to come from its children and go to its children.
Al-Sisi also thanked the outgoing interim president before both men signed the handover of power document in the presence of Arab leaders and heads of state as well as other Egyptian and foreign dignitaries. Attending the inauguration ceremony was Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, accompanied by a high-level delegation, as well as top Gulf officials including Kuwaiti Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah, Saudi Crown Prince Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, and Deputy Commander of the Emirati Armed Forces, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi Mohammed bin Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. The United States was represented by a senior advisor to Secretary of State John Kerry, while most European countries sent their ambassadors. It was the announcement that Egyptians on Tahrir Square have been awaiting to hear and to celebrate. People filled the street waving national flags and photos of the new head of state. This supporter said it wasn't just the older generation who supported Sisi. The youth are with Sisi as well.
I swear this is happiness, for us and for all Arabs. This represents all Arabs. He will solve a lot, God willing.
The crowd represented a cross-section of Egyptian society, or at least of the 23 million people who voted for al-Sisi and those who see him as the savior of the nation. With more than a quarter of Egyptians living below the poverty line, Sisi faces an array of challenges, including fixing the economy, preventing further political crisis, and easing poverty. Louis Balkar for the news at 10.
A few hours after being sworn in, Sisi made his first speech to the nation, saying he will focus on fighting terrorism. Defeating terrorism and achieving security is the top priority in our coming phase, he said. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour met in Geneva with the International Labour Organization's Director General Guy Ryder. The Prime Minister is leading a Jordanian delegation to the 103 session of the ILO, where he will address the meeting, focusing on the challenges facing the Jordanian labor market as a result of hosting large numbers of Syrian refugees. During his meeting with Ryder, the Prime Minister praised the partnership between Jordan and the ILO, culminating in several joint projects mainly aimed at improving work environment and social protection of laborers. Mansour voiced hope the ILO would help influence the international community in assisting Jordan as it continues to pay for the high cost of hosting Syrian refugees. Separately, Mansour met with a number of Swiss officials on further boosting bilateral ties between the two countries. Palestinian and Israeli Presidents Mahmoud Abbas and Shimon Peres joined Pope Francis in an unprecedented prayer meeting at the Vatican. The meeting began 2 hours ago at 7 p.m. Rome local time. When he made the surprise invitation to the two men during a recent visit to the Holy Land, the Pope hoped the gesture would recreate a desire and a possibility of relaunching the stalled Middle East peace process. Today, Pope Francis welcomed Abbas and Peres at the guest house, and then the three, accompanied by Patriarch Bartholomew, were driven to what the Vatican called a neutral site in the Vatican Gardens. We have gathered here Israelis, Palestinians, Jews, Christians, and Muslims so that each of us can express a desire for peace for the Holy Land and for all who dwell there, the Master of Ceremonies said as the service began. She said the presidents want to voice the desire of their respective peoples to invoke to God the common longing for peace. Religious representatives of the three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, then began prayers for peace in Italian, Hebrew, Arabic, and English. Following the invocation, the two presidents were to shake hands and then plant a small olive tree together as an enduring symbol of the mutual desire for peace between the Palestinian and Israeli peoples. The Vatican had billed the meeting a pause from politics and said it did not expect it to lead to an immediate breakthrough. No one is presumptuous enough to think peace will break out on Monday, said church officials and organizers of the meeting, Father Barbatista. The intention is to reopen a road that has been closed for some time, he said. Shops were closed in the West Bank city of Ramallah in solidarity with nearly 300 Palestinian prisoners on hunger strike against Israeli detention without trial. Black and white flags bearing slogans such as "Freedom for prisoners" and "Chains must be broken" flew in the streets of Ramallah. In the occupied West Bank city of Hebron, dozens of Palestinian protesters marched in the streets in support of the hunger strikers. The hunger strike began on April 24th by a group of 120 prisoners held under Israeli administrative detention or incarceration without trial of Palestinians suspected of security offenses. They were later joined by 170 other inmates. Israel's prison service said 65 hunger strikers were being treated in hospitals. However, a Palestinian lawyer who has visited some of the hospitalized inmates put the number of prisoners who have required medical care at 100. Back here at home, Italy's Foreign Minister Federica Mogherini, on a visit to Jordan, toured today Al-Azraq camp for Syrian refugees, where she inaugurated an Italian-built hospital. The recently opened facility is the 6th refugee camp for Syrians in Jordan. It has an initial capacity for 50,000 refugees and can take up to 130,000 refugees. As she inaugurated the 130-bed hospital, the minister said while the international community continues to carry out aid efforts to refugees as well as to host countries, it must also work towards ending the war in Syria.
It's a parallel work that we have to do, or rather three parallel works. Assisting the refugees, and here I think that today we can celebrate a positive step in this, supporting Jordan as well as other countries in their effort to welcome the refugees, and we thank you for that, we appreciate that. And on the political level, try to relaunch the efforts for a political solution.
Earlier, Mogherini met with Foreign Minister Nasser Judeh and discussed with him the Syria crisis as well as the stalled Middle East peace process. Judeh briefed the minister on the detrimental effect of the Syria crisis and ongoing influx of refugees on Jordan's resources and on the host communities. Former international peace envoy to Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, said Syria is descending into a Somalia-style failed state run by warlords and cautioned that this poses a grave threat to the future of the Middle East. Brahimi, who stepped down a week ago after the failure of peace talks he mediated in Geneva, said without concerted efforts for a political solution to Syria's brutal civil war, there is a serious risk that the entire region will blow up. In an interview with the German Der Spiegel magazine published this weekend, Brahimi said the conflict is not going to stay inside Syria. Brahimi said many countries misjudged the Syrian crisis, expecting Bashar al-Assad's rule to crumble as some other Arab leaders had done, adding that was a mistake they compounded by supporting the war effort instead of the peace effort. On the ground in Syria, meanwhile, there are reports of Syrian jets striking rebel-held areas around the country. Syrian fighters struck the town of Mleha in Damascus province. Fighting was also reported in the southern province of Dir'a and the northern city of Aleppo. Violent attacks continue following the re-election of Bashar al-Assad, who won last Tuesday's election with nearly 89% of the vote. Over to Iraq, where at least 18 people were killed in 2 blasts at a headquarters of Kurdish political party in Diyala. Most of the victims were members of the Kurdish security forces guarding the offices of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan PUK party. Jalala City Council officials said the suicide bomber, after parking a car packed with explosives, managed to sneak into the building and detonate his vest. In recent days, militants have overrun parts of 2 major cities, occupied a university campus in western Iraq, and set off a dozen car bombs in Baghdad. Jalala lies in disputed territories and is one of several towns where Iraqi troops and Kurdish regional guards have previously faced off against each other, asserting their competing claims over the area. On the last public appearance before his abdication, Spain, King Juan Carlos attended a parade to celebrate the Day of the Armed Forces. Dressed as Captain General of the Armed Forces and for the last time as head of state, King Juan Carlos, accompanied by the Queen, stood next to his son, Prince Philippe, who is set to succeed him. The transition will take place on the 18th of this month. King Juan Carlos announced his abdication on Monday, and the following day the cabinet passed a 2-point bill on the transition to lawmakers. Juan Carlos, aged 76, has spent 40 years on the throne. He helped Spain through a smooth transition to democracy in the 1970s after the Francisco Franco dictatorship. We stay in Spain, where thousands of Basque residents held hands to form a 123-kilometer chain calling for the right to vote on independence. Organizing group named It's in Our Hands estimated some 100,000 people joined the chain. Demonstrators dressed in red, white, and green Basque flags raised their linked hands as helicopters flew over the line, stretching from the city of Durango to Pamplona, some 76 miles away. A long economic crisis and political corruption scandal have triggered broad public disenchantment with key institutions that anchor Spain's democracy. The Basque country, with its own language and culture, has long sought greater self-rule from Spain. Actor and comedian Tracy Morgan, best known for his roles on Saturday Night Live and 30 Rock, was badly injured when the limo bus he was riding in overturned in a multi-vehicle crash in New Jersey. 45-year-old Morgan is in critical condition in an intensive care unit at a hospital in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Comedian James McNair, also known as Jimmy Mack, was killed in the crash, and at least 3 others were hospitalized after a tractor trailer struck the back of the limo bus. The driver of the truck was charged with 1 count of death by auto and 4 counts of assault by auto. Police are still investigating the crash, and the National Transportation Safety Board also sent investigators. Music, food, sunshine, and smiles are taking over Brazil, with the Belo Horizonte weekly street market in full swing. The favorite Sunday event attracts residents and tourists alike, all eager to sample the best of the local food. With less than a week to go before the city hosts its first World Cup match, the atmosphere in the market is more festive than ever. Locals say they are ready to welcome the thousands of soccer fans expected to arrive within the next few days. With less than a week until the World Cup 2014 opening ceremony, national teams are beginning to arrive in Brazil. The English team touched down in Rio de Janeiro with just a few days left before playing their first match. England will take on Italy in Manaus on June 14, but their confidence is shaky after an embarrassing result against Honduras in a friendly match in Miami yesterday. England's team coach, Roy Hodgson, put on a brave face and said the team would be well prepared. England will also take on Uruguay and Costa Rica in Group D. Earlier in the morning, the German squad arrived in Salvador, but without injured Marcos Rus. The players flew from Frankfurt aboard a Lufthansa Airbus aircraft that had been repainted with the Van Hansa logo to mark the World Cup competition. Their first match in Group G is on June 16 against Portugal in Salvador, and later on they will play the other members of the group, Ghana and the USA. The Japanese team also arrived in Sao Paulo, and according to the team's captain, Makoto Hasabe, the team was feeling calm. Football analysts predict that the team's attacking style at the forefront is sure to be more entertaining than in their previous World Cup appearances, but they may lack the defensive capabilities to reach the finals in Brazil. The Asian champions have been paired with Colombia, Ivory Coast, and Greece in an even-looking Group C. And finally, fair weather tonight in most regions with northwesterly moderate winds. Tomorrow, another rise in temperatures expected, but it remains moderate in most regions and relatively hot in the Jordan Valley. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a fair tonight, but hot day tomorrow with northerly moderate to fresh winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King attends the inauguration ceremony of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as Egypt's new president and discusses with him ways to enhance bilateral ties and coordination. The Palestinian and Israeli presidents joined Pope Francis in an unprecedented prayer meeting at the Vatican in a gesture hoped to lead to relaunching the stalled Middle East peace process. And former peace envoy to Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, says the situation in Syria is getting worse and cautions that it poses a grave threat to the future of the Middle East. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.